Welcome, heathens. We gather today in rebellious spirit, lamenting the festering cruelty humanity has inflicted on Earth. Myths of holy subjugation plague our world. Let our pursuit of infernal wisdom defy their absurdities. May our compassion for Earth and for each other ward off their atrocities. Hail, Satan! Welcome, heathens, to a Hexennacht observance by Satanic Colorado's ministry team. Thank you for joining us. I'm Legz V. Daisy, Satanic Minister and Congregation Head for Satanic Colorado, and joining me for today's sermon are Minister Diama Luciano and Minister Kassandra LaMent. We hope that by the end of today's sermon, you'll each have a more complete understanding of the history of Hexennacht and its significance in the practice of modern Satanism. May that knowledge empower you as you aspire to nobility in action and thought guided by your individual will. For those of you watching the recording of this sermon, please do all of the social media things to help this Hexennacht observance reach a wider audience. And with that, let's begin. For millennia, cultures have faced the prolonged darkness and frigidness of winter. They've celebrated the arrival of spring. Although the symbols vary widely by location and tradition, the ubiquitous meanings of such celebrations are renewal, fertility, and hope, the evocation of a prosperous year ahead. The commonality of these traditions show our shared humanity and our shared condition. People have always turned to symbols and rites to create meaning where they must toil or endure hardship. In our time of technological comfort and economic abundance, many of us are insulated from the cycles and toils prompting these common festivities, but the symbols live on in our cultures, or I should say some do, in muted fashion. Cultures which have been subjected to the domination of Christendom have seen the symbols appropriated into the orthodoxy or else driven from public life. When Christianity displaced the cultural practices of Transalpine Europe, symbols of Ostara were allowed to persist only as the holiday could be appropriated to the monotheistic norm. Thus, the Easter Bunny and egg decorating traditions now work only to entice children into worship of a Messiah, manipulating the childlike joy of play into a sinister hook. Springtime revelries, however, became sacrilege, for they could not be so contorted in service of monotheism which treats pleasure as suspect. Rituals evoking protection and prosperity from any source other than the Christian God became heresy. They denounced all other religious practices as the work of Satan. They delegitimized the people's ability to draw inspiration and fulfillment outside of their hierarchical authority. One could no longer connect with nature or draw upon their own strength and independence. Only their proxy god could bestow such blessings, so that we could be made dependent or else villainized and dispossessed. This all too familiar belligerent intolerance resulted in the construction of the witch and the purge of those who would not conform. We celebrate Hexenacht each year so that this history will not be lost, so that we may learn from this history rather than repeat it, so that we may be inspired to intervene when such belligerence rears its ugly head in our public lives, and so that we may see the humanity they would deny their victims, disrupt their attempts to purge us, and dismantle the pyre before the next witch is burned. See how independence from their narrative is framed as a threat to humanity itself. Recognize that they are constructing a vision of humanity which is subservient to a myth. They frame us as evil for our liberation. In Satan's name, we denounce dehumanization in all its forms, instead celebrating the autonomy of one and all. See how the absurdities of their mythical almighty can justify heinous behavior. Recognize that threats and promises of eternal fates serve to distract us from the meaning and finality of our lives on earth. They would justify by faith that real atrocities can serve an unseen, a greater good. In Satan's name, we exalt our very lives and embrace the urgency of our finite vitality. See how their witch hunts sustain the subjugation of humanity. Recognize how they conceal their vile motives. They hunt those who would threaten their power or denounce how they wield it. In Satan's name, we contest their moral authority, judging witch hunts as evil for the harm and suffering they sanctimoniously inflict and for the oppression that they perpetuate. Next, we will be hearing from Minister Diama discussing the history of witch hunts.
I invoke Satan. Satan is not some fictitious beast in hell, but rather Satan is your force of will. Satan is your desire, your ambition, unrestrained by the self-deception, guilt, and hatred expected of you by your society. Cast aside Puritan and functionalist expectations that you live quietly and modestly in the shadow of your betters. Embrace your will. Erase your guilt. Enjoy your life, for there are no betters. The differences between a homeless man and the president are nothing more than a complex web of stories we tell ourselves. You are better and more important than no one, and no one is better or more important than you. Satan is the adversary to subservience to any man or his god. You, unbound, are Satan, and I summon you. In Synagogue of Satan, Stanislaw Przybyszewski says, yes, the Holy Fathers themselves warned of the colors of the flowers with which the demon, the evil enemy, clothed himself in color and splendor. Azarius, the iconoclast, competed with Gregory the Great in the destruction of artistic images. Theodosius II had every temple destroyed and crosses erected on top of them. They destroyed the most majestic poetic works with disastrous falsifications or annihilated them completely. The diabolist Cyprian taught that varia daemonia, various works of the demon, were hidden in poems. Stanislaw says, the law of Constantine had already placed heavy penalties upon the practice of magic. Now one law followed another, and each new one was more severe than the last, until Emperor Valens, all the philosophers were driven out. He says, this was the beginning of the terrible martyrdom of the proud children of Satan, against which the Christian persecutions of Nero seemed like a charming game. Przybyszewski speaks here of the beginning of the great and enduring persecution of the children of Satan under the Christian emperors of the Roman Empire. The people who, it is said, are not touched by the light of God and who are driven by the works of Satan. But we know that God is but a word invented by man, and so the children of Satan are all people who deny the word of God, or are denied the word of God. Our people. For whether you identify as a Satanist or not, all people spurned by the holy institution of God are children of Satan, children of the self, children of this carnal, earthly world. Witches, Satanists, heathens, heretics. While this may seem like a mere address to you all today, and a glorious one, this was not once so. These are not fundamental identities of the speaking inhabitants of the cosmos. They are not real states of nature, or valid or genuine properties of humankind. They, like God, are words too. They are invented labels, which were once meant to satisfy and legitimize a narrative which could be destroyed by those who were to inherit those labels. God is not just a social construct. He is a system of social constructs which are meant to interlock and establish an entire false reality, a reality that is monopolized and dictated by the whims of those people who lay claim to God's word on earth. But there is no God anywhere but on the earth, for God is a word invented by man that means a reality of servitude to whichever relevant hierarchy owns the word at any given time. In the social construction of reality, Peter L. Berger and Thomas Luckman say, the monopolistic tradition and its expert administrators are sustained by a united power structure. Those who occupy the derisive power positions are ready to use their power to impose the traditional definitions of reality on the population under their authority. Potentially competitive conceptualizations of the universe are liquidated as soon as they appear, either physically destroyed, whoever does not worship the gods must die, or they are integrated within the tradition itself, say, the universal experts argue that the competing pantheon Y is really nothing but another aspect or nomenclature for the traditional pantheon X. In the latter case, if the experts succeed with their argument and the competition is liquidated by merger, as it were, the tradition becomes enriched and differentiated. The competition may also be segregated within the society and thus made innocuous as far as the traditional monopoly is concerned. For example, no member of the conquering or ruling group may worship gods of type Y, but the subjugated or lower strata may do so. The same protective segregation may be applied to foreigners or guest peoples. Medieval Christendom provides an excellent illustrations of all three liquidating procedures. Open heresy had to be physically destroyed, whether it was embodied in an individual, say a witch, or a collective, say the Albigensian community. End quote. From first principles, the witch, the Satanist, the heathen, the heretic were labels which were slapped upon threats to the reality imposed by Christian rulers. People who thought or behaved incorrectly to Christian principles were a threat to the very order of the legitimacy of God's rule on earth. That is, they were a threat to their monopoly over everyone's subjective reality. But this phenomenon is not unique to Christianity. Those accused of what we call witchcraft or the practicing of unacceptable magic have been persecuted for all of human history. We know that magic is merely the practice of arts for which the mechanisms used are unknown or misunderstood by any audience which watches the practitioner. Therefore, witches are merely those people whose practice in art or science have been misunderstood in such a way that their existence now poses a threat to the dominant reality accepted by those around them. Our word, Satanist, was once a Hebrew word for accuser or adversary that was Christianized and then turned into a psychological weapon, a spell. Witch, our word, was once a German word that was Christianized by the Romans and turned into a psychological weapon, a spell. You as Satanists ought to know by now that words are spells, and spells are merely words, and the effects they have on those who hear them. Psychological manipulations. Satanist or witch were once words you could cast at someone and make all around them cower in fear of their supposed power. But whereas the word witchcraft was once a spell cast by Christian charlatans to ensnare their victims, we Satanists now cast the spell unto ourselves willingly. Then and now, Christian priests and other charlatans use the power of illusion to distort the minds of those they had bent to their whims and commanded them to destroy any they wished merely by casting a single word. Conducting logic, but guided by shadowed and false premises. Heretic, for even those Christians who are a threat to monopolized reality. Satanist, for those non-Christian religious people who dare deny the light of the Christian God. Witch, for those women and children who live under the yoke of Christian rule and who speak too freely or know too much and who practice the arts or sciences which are unknown to the incurious morons of the world. In The Witch, Ronald Hutton says, "The literary works and the trials, therefore, had an interdependent relationship drawing on a compact set of territories in the Western Alps, which was, as Hansen long ago pointed out, to play a decisive role in engendering the early modern witch trials as the literary works produced there developed between them the portrait of what became widely known in the next century as the witches' Sabbath. These Alpine sources bear out Grimm's model of a mixture of Orthodox Christian portraits of heresy and folklore, but the two are not evenly balanced. The basic framework of the new image of satanic witchcraft in the two kinds of Alpine source was taken from images of heresy, the nocturnal gathering to worship Satan or one of his lesser demons, often in animal form, the indiscriminate sexual orgy, and child murder and cannibalism, all adding up to an incarnation of the anti-human, derived from ancient times as well as the anti-Christian. What the new stereotype did was to combine the church's two prior stereotypes of demonic heretics and demonic magicians in an atmosphere ultimately produced by the persecution of magical practitioners, which commenced in the 1370s. The true emotive power of the combination was that it produced a heretical sect in which Satan empowered its members with the ability to work harm against their neighbors on a grand scale, with the aid of devils and, above all, to kill their small children. This provided the context in which local panics could occur, in which led immediately, as seen in the Valais, to trials and executions on a scale out of all proportion to those of medieval magicians hitherto. End quote. Hexennacht, or Walpurgisnacht, was originally the pagan holiday of Beltane, wherein village spiritual practitioners would go to the tops of mountains and ritually dance around sacred fires to drive away the spirits of winter and welcome the spirit of spring. When the 8th century charlatan Walpurga, a Christian abbess, arrived with her patron charlatan Saint Boniface, converting the German people to Christianity, and in doing so converted Beltane to Walpurgisnacht, wherein the once joyful villagers were set to cower in their villages, afraid of witches conducting sabbaths on the mountain tops. 1,000 years later, the German region would reap a terrible, terrible harvest from the poisonous Christian seed which grew there. Hysteria grew to perilous levels, and in the 17th century, hundreds were put to death in Würzburg alone. In August 1629, the chancellor of the Prince Bishop of Würzburg wrote in German to a friend, "As to the affair of witches, which your grace thinks brought to an end before this, it has started up afresh, and no words can do justice to it. All the woe and misery of it, there are still 400 in the city, high and low, of every rank and sex. Nay, even clerics, so strongly accused that they may be arrested at any hour. It is true that of the people of my gracious prince here, some out of all offices and faculties must be executed. Clerics, electoral councillors and doctors, city officials, court assessors, several of whom your grace knows. There are law students to be arrested. The Prince Bishop has over 40 students who are soon to be pastors. Among them, 13 or 14 are said to be witches. A few days ago, the dean was arrested. 2 others were summoned, have fled. The notary of our church consistory, a very learned man, was yesterday arrested and put to the torture. In a word, a third part of the city is surely involved. The richest, most attractive, most prominent of the clergy are already executed. A week ago, a maiden of 19 was executed, of whom it is said everywhere that she was the fairest in the whole city, and was held by everybody a girl of singular modesty and purity. She will be followed by 7 or 8 others of the best and most attractive persons, and thus many are put to death for renouncing God at the being of the witch dances, against whom nobody else has ever spoken a word. To conclude this wretched matter, there are children of 3 and 4 years, to the number of 300, who are said to have had intercourse with the devil. I have seen put to death children of 7, promising students of 10, 12, 14, and 15 of the nobles. But I cannot and must not write more of this misery. There are persons of yet higher rank who you know, and would marvel to hear of, nay, who would scarcely believe it. Let justice be done." End quote. Tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of women and children were executed as witches in the men, women, and children were executed as witches in the late Middle Ages for the crime of being victims to the sheer hysteria of madmen poisoned by the ludicrous insanity of the Christian-imposed reality. As many as 50,000 alone were executed between 1400 and 1775. Our people, the threats to the Christian reality, people who were just like us, or in most cases, not nearly as blasphemous as we are, were drowned. We were burned alive at the stake. We were cut into pieces while still alive, and then the pieces were set aflame. We were clubbed to death, raped, we were hung. If we were alive then, and among them, we would surely be with them now. We are them. They are our people, the children of Satan, those cast aside by God's hierarchy. This plague of miserable Christian hysteria inspired murder followed the Puritans, who simply could not find a place in Europe where they could be well enough enslaved, and brought the most insidious of Christian values with them to the New World. Here, the seed of Christian hatred festered until we had our own outbreak of witch trials in America, wherein 200 people in Salem were accused of witchcraft, and then 19 were executed in accordance of law by the invalid charlatan judge John Hathorne, forever may his grave be spat upon, to execution for the crime of being misunderstood by a man who did not understand little of anything, or perhaps knew too much, and was merely a manipulative and sadistic social serial killer. Remembered be thy names: Bridget Bishop, Sarah Good, Rebecca Nurse, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin, Sarah Wilds, Reverend George Burroughs, George Jacobs Sr., Martha Carrier, John Proctor, John Willard, Martha Corey, Mary Eastley, Mary Parker, Ann Pudiator, Wilmot Red, Margaret Scott, and Samuel Wardwell Sr. Remembered be thy names, and let us share a moment of silence for them and all people killed, not only in the United States, but across the world, in witch hunts and hysterical, violent uprisings. This rot, this malignant, cancerous, and murderous rot did not end with the Salem witch trials. The witch hunters have persevered, and now to this very day they have followed us, dogging our every step, and present a grave new mass threat, not only to those of us who have unified under the banner of Satanism against these foes, but to all of our society. But we, the children of Satan, are not helpless victims this time. We gladly renounce the word of God this time, that false system of language crafted reality. We have destroyed Walpurgisnacht and reclaimed Hexennacht for ourselves. Honor to those hundreds of thousands of witches who have fallen to the spell of homicidal Christian delusion. Glory be to the witches' night. May the fear we strike in our delusional enemies cause them to lose sleep and falter in their endeavors. Next to the stand, I welcome Kassandra LaMent.
From the 1600s to today, it's hard to overstate how profoundly witch hunts, moral panics, scapegoating, and collective delusions have shaped American culture and society. These aren't just old stories. These panics have wrecked communities, torn families apart, taken lives, and silenced voices. shaping what we can read, or say, or even think. My section in this sermon will examine America's habit of inventing and chasing folk devils, false threats pushed by people who stand to profit from sowing division and fear. Of course, this practice predates America. In the 1400s, the Malleus Maleficarum was a death warrant for any woman who was made out to be Satan's bride. Thousands were killed in Europe, blamed for bad crops or sick livestock. Blood libel falsely accused Jews of ritually mutilating children, fueling centuries of violence. In one of the earliest instances of a "what about the children" panic, nearly 2,500 years ago, Socrates was sentenced to death for corrupting Athenian youth with his ideas, ironically forced to drink hemlock for poisoning the minds of those he taught. Superstitions once drove these witch hunts, visions, rumors, so-called signs from God. Today, pseudoscience takes their place, fabricated data, manipulated statistics, and junk science. Yet, whether from pulpits or pie charts, facts don't matter when fear grips towns and churches. This mindset crossed the ocean, took root in America, and still thrives today. In 1692, the Salem witch trials created a template for how this would look in America. Rumors became accusations, targeted an entire community, and ultimately led to 19 executions for witchcraft. Their persecution was not an isolated tragedy. This system for feeding collective delusions would become a model America would be keen to keep using. In the 1840s, Irish immigrants were made into a new sort of folk devil. 1 million arrived fleeing famine, but many Americans called them papist criminals out to ruin the country. An early pseudoscience phrenology claimed that they were born to be degenerate criminals. Newspapers ran hundreds of stories about Irish brawls, and riots in Philadelphia killed dozens. Signs saying "No Irish" went up, and the culture turned against them, creating prejudices that last to this day. During World War II, Japanese Americans became targets. After Pearl Harbor, over 120,000 were locked in camps. They were called spies without any grounds. Loyalty tests were the new made-up junk science at the time, a pseudoscientific sham where vague questions about allegiance were used to justify internment. Movies began showing Asians as enemies, and a stereotype was created that has hung on. A weak apology would come years later, but war hand-waved away any real culpability. The 1950s brought twin witch hunts. The Red Scare ruined thousands of lives with falsified communist lists. Lie detectors known to be unreliable were the token pseudoscience of the time. The Lavender Scare resulted in the firing of thousands of gay government workers, calling them dangerous. Most Americans supported both of these scares, fear overriding sense. Queer and commie became slurs, all justified by the Cold War. In the 1970s, a new war on drugs intentionally targeted Black and Latino neighborhoods. It was sold as a fight against crime, but arrests were focused on racial minorities, even though drug use was the same everywhere. Stories about crack babies were known to be lies, but the news ran with them. TV showed Black men as drug lords, prisons filled up, and families broke apart. Most people backed tougher laws, believing them to be justice, not seeing that the real goal was reducing certain populations and not drug use. As Satanists, we know what it's like to be cast as devils. In the 1980s, the Satanic Panic painted us as child-sacrificing monsters. People said daycares and teens were part of devil-worshipping groups, with thousands facing charges without any credible evidence. No cults were uncovered, no bodies were found. Fake, recovered memories pushed stories of abuse, TV specials got millions watching, and the tip lines were flooded with stories of satanic ritual abuse. Games and music got banned, lives were ruined, and most believed it until years later. By the late 2000s, many people called it a mistake, but nothing could fix the damage, and many of the symptoms of this panic still live on today. After 9/11, Muslims were scapegoated. Millions were watched, and thousands were detained, even though no big plots were discovered. The news played terror stories non-stop, mosques were attacked, and schools pulled books about Islam. Families were split, communities lived scared, and most people later agreed it went too far, but tough times explained it away. An entire religion was permanently marked as dangerous. In the 2010s, QAnon spread stories of deep state child traffickers and Antifa plots. No such networks existed. Social media pushed millions of posts, armed groups were formed, threats rose, and patriots excused it. Donald Trump leaned into this fear in 2015, calling Mexicans criminals and rapists. He banned travel from Muslim countries, and his supporters believed the immigrant invader narrative he created. The news repeated it, and here we are, a decade later, where his second term has unleashed an unprecedented assault on immigrants. He's issued over 20 executive orders since January, aiming to deport millions, stripping legal protections, and militarizing the border. Over 530,000 immigrants have lost legal status, facing deportation to dangerous places, while 700,000 dreamers and others hang in limbo. ICE raids now target schools, hospitals, churches, and homes, spreading terror in communities. Pseudoscience and fear fueled this crusade too. Trump's team calls migrants criminals, yet data shows immigrants commit fewer crimes than native-born citizens, and certainly fewer than the Trump administration. The narrative of threat persists, amplified by posters of criminal aliens on the White House lawn. Even U.S. citizens face detention if they look foreign or criticize these policies. The administration's enhanced vetting targets legal immigrants, students, and green card holders, invoking wartime laws to bypass the courts. Chillingly, Trump has floated sending U.S. citizens with convictions to foreign prisons, a move without precedent. The media is stoking this fire, replaying invasion rhetoric, while supporters cheer. Like so many witch hunts before, communities are being demonized to consolidate power under the guise of national security. And this isn't the only panic we're dealing with today. America is caught in a wokeness panic, a modern witch hunt targeting diversity, equity, and inclusion, and LGBT people. Critical race theory, despite never actually being taught in schools, is now banned in 40 states. Book bans are everywhere, and over 3,000 titles are being pulled from the shelves, especially those by Black and queer writers. Trans youth are being legally targeted in an unprecedented way. Over 500 laws now block their medical care, and even the use of their names. From sports teams to restrooms, these laws, rooted in baseless fears, ignore the conclusions of every major medical institution. Bigotry, completely divorced from reality, paints trans people as threats, fueling clinic attacks and driving suicides higher, with trans kids facing forced detransition. This isn't about protecting anyone. It's a deliberate erasure of our siblings meant to divide and control. For over 3 centuries, America has hunted witches, be they women, immigrants, sexual and racial minorities, or nonconformists, casting them as scapegoats to be sacrificed. From Salem's gallows to 2025's deportations, these crusades thrive on lies spun by those who crave control and disguised as protection. On this Hexennacht, we honor those who have been victimized. But we don't just mourn, we vow to fight back. We commit to exposing and dismantling the systems that continue to destroy lives using pseudoscience and superstition. These panics thrive on manipulated data and baseless claims to create scapegoats, and so our task is clear. Challenge fear-driven falsehoods with evidence, amplify the silenced through art and action alike, and stand with those under attack. We must face the current panics and the next with unrelenting resolve to expose falsehoods and protect the unjustly accused. Hail Satan.
We have but one life to live here on earth, so let us defend our autonomy, our welfare, and our humanity with vital urgency. Embrace now the spirits of compassion, nobility, and action. Inhumanity comes for our neighbors and for us in turn. Pull the accused from the pyre before their fates are sealed. Denounce, dissuade, and defeat the bloodthirsty crowds seeking a witch to burn. Deny them their sacrifice. And dismantle the pyre so that humanity may put such barbarism behind it. It is done. Hail Satan.